The floorboard creaked under my weight, but they didn't hear me. To them, I was just the old woman shuffling to the bathroom at midnight, invisible in my own son's house. But I stopped cold when her voice, my daughter-in-law Iris's voice, slithered through the crack in Wesley's office door like poison through a keyhole. "The paperwork is ready," she was saying, her tone as cold and clinical as a business transaction. "Tomorrow we'll have her committed to Willowbrook Manor. The dementia evaluation is scheduled for 9 a.m. and Dr. Peterson owes us a favor. Once she's declared incompetent, we can liquidate Harrison & Sons within the week. It's the only major asset left, and frankly, it's worth more than we initially calculated." I didn't breathe. I couldn't breathe. Harrison & Sons, the custom furniture workshop my husband Edmund and I had built from nothing in our garage 43 years ago. The business I'd trusted my son to manage while I recovered from my stroke. The legacy I'd promised would be his inheritance. And now it was just an asset to be liquidated, and I was the inconvenient obstacle standing in their way. That night, I didn't pack a suitcase. I packed a file box, and if stories of ordinary people fighting back against the ultimate betrayal inspire you, please subscribe to this channel, because what happened next changed everything. Not just for me, but for everyone who thought they could underestimate a woman with nothing left to lose. Let me take you back to how I ended up standing in that dark hallway, listening to my own son and his wife plan to steal my life's work and lock me away to do it. 3 months earlier, I was lying in a hospital bed at St. Mary's, trying to remember my own middle name. The stroke had been what doctors called moderate, not severe enough to kill me, but devastating enough to scramble my short-term memory and leave my left hand shaking like a leaf in a windstorm. Wesley sat beside my bed, holding my trembling fingers, his eyes filled with what I believed was genuine concern. "Don't worry about anything, Mom," he said, squeezing my hand with the same gentleness he'd shown as a child when I was sick with flu. "You're coming home with Iris and me. We'll take care of you until you're back on your feet. And don't even think about the business. I'll handle Harrison & Sons until you're ready to take over again." I was so grateful I actually cried. Here was my son stepping up in my hour of need, offering to shoulder the responsibility of the furniture workshop that had been the center of my life since Wesley was in elementary school. The business Edmund and I had nurtured from 3 employees working in our converted garage to 37 skilled craftsmen creating custom pieces for clients across 3 states. To show my complete trust and appreciation, I did something I'd never done in 43 years of business ownership. I signed papers making Wesley the official general manager of Harrison & Sons. With full operational authority, I gave him access to all our accounts, introduced him to our most important clients, and handed over the keys to the workshop where Edmund had taught him to use a lathe when he was 12 years old. "This is temporary," I told myself, as I signed the management agreements in Harold Whitman's law office, my left hand still shaking from the stroke. "Just until I get my strength back." Wesley smiled and hugged me, whispering, "I take good care of everything, Mom. This business will be in better hands than ever." The changes started small, so subtle I convinced myself they were signs of Wesley's enthusiasm rather than symptoms of a larger plan. Within the first week of my recovery at their house, he began talking about modernizing Harrison & Sons with the excitement of someone who'd been waiting years to implement his vision. "We need to streamline operations, Mom," he said over breakfast one morning, spreading computer printouts across their kitchen table. "Some of these old processes are incredibly inefficient, and honestly, some of our longtime clients aren't as profitable as they could be." When I asked to see the analysis he was referring to, he waved his hand dismissively. "Don't stress yourself with the details. You need to focus on getting better." My office, the one Edmund had built for me in 1987, with hand-carved oak panels and a view of the workshop floor, was reorganized for efficiency. My desk, where I'd handled client consultations for decades, was moved to a corner and replaced with Wesley's modern workstation. The family photos, the awards from the Craftsman's Guild, the thank you letters from satisfied customers, all boxed up because they cluttered the professional atmosphere. When the Pemberton family called asking to speak with me about their dining room renovation, a project we'd been discussing for months before my stroke, Wesley intercepted the call. "Mom's not available for client meetings yet," he told them, though I was sitting right there, feeling perfectly capable of discussing wood stains and cabinet hardware. "But I'm fully briefed on your project and can handle everything moving forward." Then came the papers. Stacks of them, appearing on the kitchen table during my morning coffee, always with Wesley's patient explanation that they were just routine business documents, or refinancing paperwork to improve our cash flow situation. My post-stroke brain, still struggling with complex processing, couldn't always follow the legal language. But Wesley was always there with his reassuring smile. "This will reduce our monthly equipment payments by 30%, he'd say, pointing to signature lines highlighted in yellow, "and this one restructures our business loan to take advantage of better interest rates." When I asked to have our longtime accountant Bernard Morrison review the documents, Wesley gently discouraged it. "Bernie's from the old school, Mom. These new financial instruments are beyond his expertise. I've had everything vetted by Iris's brother-in-law. He's a corporate attorney who specializes in small business optimization." What I didn't realize was that each signature was another bar in a cage being built around me. Every refinancing document, every modernization agreement, every efficiency improvement contract was designed to gradually transfer real control of Harrison & Sons from me to Wesley, while maintaining the illusion that I was still the owner making informed decisions about my own business. It was a Tuesday night in October, 3 months after I'd moved into Wesley's house. I'd been having trouble sleeping, a side effect of my stroke medication, so I often found myself padding through their hallways at odd hours, making trips to the kitchen for warm milk or to the bathroom. The house was usually silent during these midnight wanderings, which made the low voices from Wesley's home office so startling. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see the blue glow of his computer screen casting shadows on the wall. Iris's voice was coming through clearly. She must have been on speakerphone, probably calling from her business trip to Portland. I wasn't intentionally eavesdropping. I was simply trying to pass by quietly without disturbing what I assumed was a private conversation between husband and wife. But then I heard my name, and I froze in the darkened hallway like a deer sensing a predator. "The dementia evaluation is scheduled for 9 a.m. Friday," Iris was saying, her voice carrying the same tone she used when discussing grocery lists or vacation planning. "Dr. Peterson has agreed to provide the necessary documentation. He owes Richard a favor from that malpractice case last year." Wesley's response made my blood turn to ice water. "And the business liquidation can proceed immediately after the competency hearing. I want to make sure we're not leaving any legal loose ends." Iris's laugh was sharp and calculating. "Once she's declared mentally incompetent and committed to Willowbrook Manor, you'll have full legal authority as her appointed guardian. Harrison & Sons can be dissolved and the assets sold within 2 weeks. Frankly, the property alone is worth more than we initially projected." I stood there in that dark hallway, my stroke-weakened legs shaking beneath my nightgown as the truth crashed over me like a collapsing building. I wasn't a beloved mother recovering in her son's home. I wasn't a temporary patient who would soon return to managing her successful business. I was a shareholder being voted out, an inconvenient obstacle to a corporate takeover, a problem to be institutionalized and forgotten. The business my husband and I had built from nothing, the legacy we'd planned to pass down through generations, the life's work that represented 43 years of 12-hour days and 7-day weeks, it was all just an asset to be liquidated. And I was just the old woman standing in the way of their financial freedom. That night, I didn't go back to bed. I didn't confront them. I didn't cry or collapse or have another stroke from the shock. Instead, I went to the guest room where I'd been staying and began planning the most important business strategy of my entire career. Because if they thought this old woman was going to quietly disappear into a nursing home while they sold her life's work, they were about to discover just how wrong they could be. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat on the edge of the guest bed staring at the digital clock as the hours crawled from 12:47 a.m. to 3:30 a.m., my mind working with a clarity I hadn't experienced since before the stroke. The conversation I'd overheard wasn't just a betrayal, It was intelligence. And intelligence, my late husband Edmund used to say, is only valuable if you act on it before your opponents realize you have it. By 4 a.m., I had formulated what I privately called Operation Liberation, a plan that would require perfect timing, complete secrecy, and access to documents that Wesley and Iris had no idea even existed. The beauty of their scheme was its arrogance. They had assumed that a woman recovering from a stroke, living in their house, dependent on their care, couldn't possibly outmaneuver them. They had forgotten that I'd been running a successful business since before Wesley was born. What they didn't know was that Edmund and I had always been paranoid about business security. We'd lived through the recession of 1991, when 3 of our competitor workshops had been destroyed by embezzlement and poor record-keeping. Edmund had insisted on maintaining what he called redundant documentation, backup records of everything, stored in places our accountants and lawyers didn't even know about. I knew I had perhaps 6 hours before Wesley woke up for his morning run, maybe 8 hours before Iris returned from Portland. During that window, I needed to access my real home, the house I still owned but had left empty during my recovery, and retrieve what Edmund had always called our life raft box, the collection of documents that could prove ownership, reveal financial irregularities, and protect us if anyone ever tried to steal what we'd built. At 4:15 a.m., I dressed quietly in the guest room, choosing practical clothes: dark jeans, comfortable shoes, a jacket with deep pockets. I left my stroke medication on the nightstand, along with the cell phone Wesley had insisted I carry for emergencies. If this plan worked, I wouldn't be coming back to need either. If it failed, the medication wouldn't matter anyway. The spare key to my house was hidden in the same place it had been for 20 years, inside the fake rock Edmund had placed beside the back porch steps. My hands were shaking as I unlocked the door, but not from the stroke this time. This was adrenaline, the kind of focused energy I hadn't felt since the early days of building Harrison & Sons, when every decision could make or break our future. My home office looked exactly as I'd left it 3 months earlier. Edmund's reading chair still angled toward the window, my desk still covered with the client sketches I'd been reviewing the morning of my stroke, the smell of lemon oil still lingering from the last time I'd polished the oak shelves. But I wasn't there for nostalgia. I was there for the locked filing cabinet in the corner, the one Wesley had never shown any interest in because it contained what he assumed were just old tax returns and expired warranties. The bottom drawer of that filing cabinet held our life raft box, a fireproof document container that Edmund had stocked with everything we might need if our business or our finances were ever threatened. Inside were the original articles of incorporation for Harrison & Sons, showing that I held 51% ownership, while Wesley held only 49%. The original partnership agreement that Edmund and I had signed in 1981, with clauses about succession and management authority that Wesley's lawyers had clearly never seen. But the real treasure was Edmund's secret ledger, a handwritten record book where he'd tracked every major transaction, every client payment, every expense and investment from 1981 through his death in 2019. Edmund had never trusted computers completely, always insisting on paper backups that couldn't be hacked or mysteriously deleted. This ledger contained 5 years of financial data that would reveal exactly what Wesley had been doing with company money. I also retrieved the external hard drive where Edmund had backed up all our client files, design specifications, and correspondence, information that would be invaluable if we needed to rebuild relationships or prove the value of our business reputation. My passport, which I hadn't touched since our trip to Ireland in 2018, the key to Safety Deposit Box 247 at Midwest Community Bank, which contained documents that even our accountant, Bernard Morrison, didn't know existed. By 6 a.m., I had everything packed into 2 boxes, one containing the immediately useful documents, another holding backup records and the computer drive. I locked my house and replaced the spare key, knowing this might be the last time I ever entered the home where Edmund and I had planned our retirement, where we'd hosted Wesley's birthday parties and Christmas mornings, where I'd recovered from my husband's funeral just 5 years earlier. I called Yellow Cab from the landline in my kitchen, using the same taxi company Edmund and I had relied on for airport trips when we didn't want to leave our car in long-term parking. When the dispatcher asked for my destination, I didn't hesitate. Mel's Diner on Highway 9, and I need the driver to help me carry 2 boxes. Before leaving Wesley's house, I wrote a single sentence on their kitchen notepad, using the same black ink pen Wesley had handed me for signing all those routine business documents. I heard you. No explanation, no accusations, no emotional appeals. Just 3 words that would let them know their midnight conversation had been overheard by the one person who could destroy their plans. The taxi ride to Mel's Diner took 12 minutes. 12 minutes during which I sat in the back seat, clutching the box of documents like a life preserver, watching the sunrise paint the sky pink and gold over the suburban neighborhoods where Wesley and Iris believed they had successfully trapped me. The driver, a middle-aged man named Carl, kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror with obvious concern for why an elderly woman was traveling alone at dawn with mysterious boxes. Mel's Diner wasn't a random selection. For 15 years, every Tuesday and Thursday morning at 7 a.m., my husband's right-hand man, Garrett Murphy, had occupied the same corner booth, drinking black coffee and eating wheat toast while reading the sports section. Garrett had been Edmund's foreman since 1995, the man who had taught Wesley how to operate the industrial sanders and helped me navigate the business after Edmund's death. If there was anyone in the world I could trust with this situation, it was Garrett. When I walked into Mel's Diner at 6:47 a.m. carrying my box of evidence, Garrett was already in his usual booth, coffee steaming beside his folded newspaper. The look on his face when he saw me, disheveled, clearly exhausted, clutching documents like precious artifacts, told me he knew immediately that something was catastrophically wrong. "Eleanor," he said, half rising from his booth as I approached. "What in God's name are you doing here at this hour? Is everything okay?" The genuine worry in his voice, the way he immediately stood to help me with the box, the fact that he called me by my first name instead of Mrs. Harrison like he had for the first 10 years he worked for us, it all confirmed what I had hoped. Garrett was still loyal to the memory of Edmund and to me, not to Wesley's version of Harrison and Sons. I didn't answer his question immediately. Instead, I placed the document box on the table between us, opened it carefully, and withdrew Edmund's secret ledger. When I slid it across the table to Garrett, his eyes widened with recognition and disbelief. He knew immediately what he was looking at. Edmund had shown him this ledger occasionally over the years when they were planning major equipment purchases or evaluating the financial impact of taking on large custom orders. "Garrett," I said, keeping my voice low enough that the other early morning diners couldn't overhear, "I need you to help me figure out exactly how much money my son has stolen from Harrison and Sons. And then I need you to help me take back my business before he destroys everything Edmund and I built." Gareth stared at the ledger, then at me, then back at the ledger. "Eleanor," he whispered, "what's happened? What has Wesley done?" The pain in his voice told me that he'd already suspected something was wrong at the workshop, that he'd probably noticed financial irregularities or management decisions that didn't make sense, but had been too loyal to question the boss's son directly. "What Wesley has done," I replied, opening the ledger to a page from 2023 that showed a major equipment purchase that I knew had never actually occurred, is underestimate his mother. And what we're going to do is prove that the biggest mistake of his life was assuming I'd quietly disappear into a nursing home while he sold my husband's legacy to the highest bidder. Garrett and I spent the next 4 hours in that corner booth at Mel's Diner, transforming from breakfast companions into forensic investigators. What we uncovered in Edmund's secret ledger wasn't just financial mismanagement. It was systematic theft, executed with the precision of someone who believed he would never be caught, because his victim would be declared incompetent before she could examine the evidence. Edmund's handwritten entries were meticulous, recording not just amounts and dates, but also his personal observations about each transaction. Payment from Whitmore Estate, $47,000 for dining room set. Deposited to business account March 15th, 23, read one entry. But when Garrett pulled up the corresponding bank statement on his phone using the mobile banking access Wesley had given him, That $47,000 deposit was nowhere to be found in the Harrison & Sons business account. We found 12 similar discrepancies over the past 8 months, major client payments that Edmund's ledger showed should have been deposited to Harrison & Sons, but which had apparently vanished into thin air. The Pemberton family dining room project alone represented $23,000 that should have been company revenue. The custom kitchen cabinets for the Riverside Development Project, $81,000 missing. The hand-carved bedroom set for the Morrison anniversary, $34,000 unaccounted for. "Jared," I said, running my finger down the columns of Edmund's careful handwriting, "pull up the business account statements for the past year. I want to see every deposit, every withdrawal, every transfer." What we discovered was a pattern of financial manipulation so brazen it took my breath away. Wesley wasn't just skimming profits. He was intercepting client payments entirely, depositing them into accounts that had nothing to do with Harrison & Sons. The key to understanding his scheme was in the safety deposit box. At 11 a.m., Garrett drove me to Midwest Community Bank, where I used the key Edmund had left in our life raft box to access a deposit box I hadn't opened since his funeral. Inside were photocopies of the original Articles of Incorporation, documents that proved beyond any doubt that I owned 51% of Harrison & Sons, not the 49% Wesley had apparently been telling his lawyers and financial advisors. But more importantly, the safety deposit box contained a document Wesley had never seen: the original partnership agreement Edmund and I had signed in 1981, which included a clause stating that any family member taking a management role in the company was bound by a 5-year non-compete agreement. If Wesley was terminated for cause, such as embezzlement, he couldn't start a competing furniture business for 5 full years, anywhere within a 200-mile radius of our workshop. The smoking gun was hidden in plain sight on Wesley's own desk computer. When Garrett accessed the business management software using his foreman credentials, we discovered something Wesley had been too arrogant to hide properly: a separate accounting category labeled WR Development Fund. W. Wesley Robert, his full initials. Every client payment that had disappeared from our regular business account had been transferred to this development fund, which was apparently financing Wesley's plan to launch his own competing furniture company. The total theft was staggering: $247,000 over 8 months. Money that should have been used for employee salaries, equipment maintenance, facility improvements, and business expansion had instead been funneled into Wesley's personal venture capital fund. He had been literally gutting Harrison & Sons to finance his own competing business, while simultaneously planning to have me declared incompetent so he could sell the remaining assets and eliminate any legal consequences for his theft. Sitting in that bank parking lot, with boxes of evidence spread across Garrett's dashboard and the weight of my son's betrayal fully documented in black and white, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Edmund's death: the fire of pure, focused rage. Not the helpless anger of someone being victimized, but the calculating fury of someone who had discovered they held all the cards in a game their opponents didn't even know they were playing. This wasn't just about money. Wesley could have simply asked me for a loan if he wanted to start his own business. I would have probably said yes. What mother wouldn't want to help her son pursue his entrepreneurial dreams? But asking would have required acknowledging that I was still a competent person, capable of making financial decisions. Instead, he had chosen to steal from me while planning to have me institutionalized, treating me like an obstacle to be removed, rather than a mother to be respected. The business wasn't just an asset to be liquidated, it was Edmund's legacy, the life's work that had paid for Wesley's college education, his first car, his wedding, the down payment on his house. Every tool in our workshop, every client relationship we'd built, every reputation we'd earned in the community represented years of Edmund's 12-hour days and weekend overtime, and Wesley was willing to destroy all of it for short-term cash to fund his own competing venture. But what transformed my heartbreak into something much more dangerous was the realization that I wasn't helpless. The stroke had affected my short-term memory and my left-hand coordination, but it hadn't touched my business instincts, my understanding of corporate law, or my ability to outmaneuver people who had underestimated me. Wesley and Iris had made the classic mistake of assuming that physical vulnerability meant mental incompetence. They thought they were dealing with a confused old woman who would sign whatever documents they put in front of her and accept whatever living arrangements they imposed on her. What they were actually dealing with was a majority shareholder who had been running a successful business for 4 decades, who understood financial forensics, who had legal resources they didn't know about, and who now had documented evidence of their criminal activity. "Gareth," I said, closing Edmund's ledger and looking at my husband's most trusted employee, "I want you to understand something clearly. I'm not asking you to help me save my business. I'm asking you to help me destroy the people who tried to steal it, because they're not just thieves, they're traitors who were willing to betray family loyalty for money." Garrett nodded grimly, his own anger building as he fully processed the scope of Wesley's betrayal. "What do you need me to do, Eleanor?" he asked. And I could hear in his voice the same loyalty that had made him Edmund's right-hand man for 20 years. "Whatever it takes to make this right. I'm with you." "First," I said, "we're going to document every cent Wesley has stolen, with dates, amounts, and bank transfer records. Then we're going to contact Bernard Morrison and have him conduct an independent audit of all business accounts. Finally, we're going to walk into Harrison & Sons tomorrow morning, and I'm going to fire my son in front of every employee who's been wondering why their paychecks have been smaller and their job security has been declining. They wanted to treat me like an asset to be liquidated. Tomorrow, they're going to discover that I'm actually the owner who's been temporarily absent, and now I'm back to collect what's mine, with interest." Monday morning at 8:30 a.m., I stood in the parking lot of Harrison & Sons, watching Wesley's silver BMW pull into the space marked General Manager, the parking spot that had been mine for 37 years before my stroke. He looked relaxed, probably believing that by this time next week, I would be confined to Willowbrook Manor and he would be the uncontested owner of a business he could liquidate at his leisure. Garrett had arrived an hour earlier to unlock the building and gather our employees for what I had told him to announce as an important company meeting. By the time Wesley walked through the front door, all 37 members of our staff were assembled in the main workshop area. Carpenters, finishers, administrative staff, even our part-time bookkeeper Martha, who usually only worked Tuesday and Thursday mornings. The look on Wesley's face when he saw me standing at the center of our workshop, wearing my best business suit and holding a folder full of evidence, was worth every hour I'd spent in that diner booth documenting his crimes. For perhaps 5 seconds, he seemed unable to process what he was seeing. His mother, who should have been safely contained in his guest bedroom, was instead commanding the attention of his workforce with the authority of someone who had never actually relinquished control. "Good morning, everyone," I said, projecting my voice across the workshop floor with the same confidence I'd used during staff meetings for decades. "Thank you for gathering on short notice. I have several important announcements to make regarding the immediate future of Harrison & Sons." I deliberately avoided looking at Wesley during this opening, treating him like just another employee rather than acknowledging any special status. Wesley finally found his voice, though it came out higher and more strained than his usual confident tone. "Mom, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be resting. You're not supposed to be making business decisions without—" I held up my hand to silence him, the same gesture I'd used when he was 8 years old and interrupting adult conversations. "Without what, Wesley?" I asked, finally turning to look directly at him. "Without the permission of the person who has been embezzling from this company for the past 8 months? Without consulting the man who has been intercepting client payments and depositing them into his own development fund? Without the approval of someone who has been planning to have me declared incompetent so he could steal my life's work?" The workshop went absolutely silent. I could see our employees looking back and forth between Wesley and me, trying to understand what was happening. These were people who had known Wesley since he was a teenager, helping his father during summer breaks. People who had attended his wedding and congratulated him when he became general manager. They were now watching their trusted supervisor accused of theft by the woman who had founded their company. As of this moment, I continued, opening my evidence folder and withdrawing Edmund's secret ledger, I am resuming my position as Chief Executive Officer of Harrison & Sons. Wesley Robert Harrison, you are terminated for cause, effective immediately. Your access to all company accounts, facilities, and confidential information is revoked. Garrett will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings under supervision. Wesley's face went through several color changes, from pale shock to flushed anger to something approaching panic as the reality of his situation began to sink in. "You can't do this," he said, his voice rising to almost a shout. "I'm the general manager. I have legal authority to run this company. You're not competent to make these decisions." "Actually, Wesley," I replied, withdrawing the original articles of incorporation from my folder and holding them high enough for everyone to see, I own 51% of this company. You own 49%. I have been the majority shareholder since 1981, and I remain the majority shareholder today. Your position as general manager was granted at my discretion and can be revoked at my discretion. I turned to address our employees directly, speaking over Wesley's continued protests. I want everyone to understand that your jobs are secure and your back pay will be restored. For the past several months, this company's profits have been diverted into unauthorized accounts, which is why your paychecks have been smaller, and why we've delayed equipment upgrades and facility improvements. That theft ends today. While Garrett supervised Wesley's removal of personal items from my old office, I made 2 phone calls that I had been planning since my discovery of the embezzlement evidence. The first was to Bernard Morrison, our longtime accountant, who arrived within 30 minutes to begin an independent audit of all company financial records. The second was to Patricia Kellerman, the most aggressive business litigation attorney in our county. Patricia had spent the previous day preparing 2 sets of legal documents based on the evidence Garrett and I had compiled. The first was a cease and desist order, preventing Wesley from starting any competing furniture business within 200 miles of our location for the next 5 years, citing the non-compete clause in his original management contract that he had apparently forgotten existed. The second document was far more serious, a criminal complaint for embezzlement and fraud, supported by bank records showing $247,000 in stolen client payments, Edmund's ledger proving the intended destination of those funds, and Wesley's own computer records documenting the WR Development Fund that had received the stolen money. When Patricia's process verber arrived at the workshop at 11:30 a.m., Wesley was still in my office, frantically making phone calls to what I assumed were lawyers or financial advisors who might help him contest his termination. The look on his face when he was simultaneously served with both legal actions was the expression of someone who had suddenly realized that his victim had been preparing for war while he thought he was executing an unopposed corporate takeover. "Mom, you can't do this to family," he said, his voice cracking as he read through the legal documents. "This will destroy me financially. The legal fees alone will bankrupt Iris and me. You're talking about criminal charges that could put me in prison. Is this really how you want to treat your only son?" "Wesley," I replied, sitting down in the chair behind my desk for the first time in 4 months. "This is exactly how I want to treat someone who stole from me while planning to have me committed to a nursing home. You stopped being my son the moment you decided I was an obstacle to be eliminated, rather than a mother to be respected. But the termination and the legal charges weren't my ultimate move. They were just the opening salvos in a much larger strategy that Wesley and Iris couldn't have anticipated because they had fundamentally misunderstood who they were trying to defeat. While they had been planning to liquidate Harrison & Sons and sell the assets, I had been planning something far more comprehensive and permanent. That afternoon, I called an emergency meeting of the board of directors, which, according to our articles of incorporation, consisted of myself as majority shareholder and Wesley as minority shareholder. Since Wesley was no longer employed by the company and was facing criminal charges for embezzling from it, his minority position had no practical power to oppose my majority decisions. I exercised my majority shareholder rights to vote for the complete dissolution of Harrison & Sons as a corporate entity, Not a sale, not a restructure, not a transition of ownership. A total dissolution that would eliminate the business as a going concern and distribute all assets according to shareholder percentage after paying all debts and obligations. Wesley and Iris had been so focused on the monetary value of liquidating Harrison & Sons that they had forgotten what the business actually represented. 37 people who had trusted Edmund and me with their livelihoods, clients who had relied on our craftsmanship for decades, suppliers who had built their own businesses around our orders, and a community reputation that had taken 4 decades to establish. Every single employee received a severance package equivalent to 6 months' salary, plus full health insurance coverage during their job search. Our most skilled craftsmen, including Garrett, received additional compensation that would allow them to purchase their own tools and equipment to start independent businesses. Our longtime clients received referrals to other quality furniture makers, along with our apologies for the disruption Wesley's theft had caused to their projects. Wesley's 49% share of the dissolution proceeds, after legal fees, employee severances, debt payments, and other obligations, amounted to approximately $23,000, less than he had stolen from a single client payment. But even that amount was immediately seized by court order to begin restitution for his embezzlement, leaving him and Iris with nothing but a mountain of legal debt and the certainty of criminal prosecution. I didn't just take back my business, I transformed my husband's legacy from a corporate asset that could be stolen into something that couldn't be touched by thieves or betrayers. The real Harrison & Sons legacy became the dozen small businesses started by our former employees, the satisfied clients who received quality work despite Wesley's attempts to sabotage their projects, and the community reputation that survived even attempted destruction by family betrayal. Wesley and Iris had seen Harrison & Sons as a treasure chest to be opened and emptied. What they discovered was that the real treasure was never the assets or the accounts. It was the relationships, the reputation, and the respect that Edmund and I had earned over 4 decades. And those things belonged to people who had earned them, not to people who thought they could steal them. They thought they were liquidating a business to fund their future. Instead, they discovered that some things are more valuable than money, and some people are more dangerous than they appear. The old woman they planned to lock away had just demonstrated that she was still the owner, and owners have the power to decide what happens to what they own, including the power to make sure thieves get exactly what they deserve. The criminal trial took 8 months to conclude, during which Wesley and Iris discovered that stealing from family doesn't make the legal system more lenient, it makes judges and juries more disgusted. The prosecution presented Edmund's secret ledger, the bank transfer records, and Wesley's own computer files documenting the WR Development Fund as evidence, so clear that even Wesley's expensive defense attorney advised him to accept a plea bargain rather than risk a jury trial. The emails started arriving 2 weeks after Wesley's termination, sent from Iris's account because Wesley's legal counsel had advised him not to contact me directly while facing criminal charges. These weren't the angry, demanding messages I might have expected, but carefully crafted appeals to family loyalty and emotional manipulation designed to make me feel guilty for destroying their lives. Eleanor, one email began, I understand you're angry about the financial irregularities, but surely we can resolve this as a family without involving the criminal justice system. Wesley made some poor decisions under stress, but he's learned from his mistakes. Think about what Edmund would have wanted. Would he really want to see his son in prison over what amounts to a family business dispute? Another message tried a different approach. The legal fees are destroying us financially. We've had to put our house up for sale, and Wesley can't find employment anywhere because of the criminal charges. Is this really the legacy you want to leave? Your grandchildren asking why Grandma Eleanor sent their father to jail. I didn't respond to any of these messages, not because I was cruel or heartless, but because responding would have suggested that their consequences were my responsibility, rather than the natural result of their own choices. Wesley hadn't made poor decisions under stress. He had executed a systematic plan to steal my life's work while having me declared incompetent. The criminal justice system wasn't destroying their family. Their crimes were destroying their family. What struck me most about their appeals was how they still didn't understand what they had actually done. They kept framing Wesley's theft as a family business dispute or financial irregularities, as if stealing $247,000 and planning to have your mother committed to a nursing home were somehow normal family disagreements that should be resolved privately rather than through the legal system. My silence wasn't revenge, it was a boundary. I had spent 3 months living in their house, signing documents I didn't fully understand, accepting their assurances that they were acting in my best interests. During that time, they had treated my trust as stupidity and my gratitude as weakness. Now they were asking me to treat their crimes as mistakes and their consequences as my responsibility. But I had learned something important during those months of investigation and legal action. Some relationships can't be repaired because they were never actually mutual to begin with. Wesley and Iris had never seen me as a person deserving respect and autonomy. They had seen me as an asset to be managed and eventually liquidated. You can't rebuild a relationship with people who have never acknowledged your fundamental humanity. With the proceeds from the Harrison & Sons dissolution, after all legal fees and employee severances had been paid, I found myself in possession of approximately $340,000, enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life, but also enough to create something meaningful that would honor Edmund's memory in a way that Wesley's theft and betrayal never could have touched. I spent weeks researching charitable foundations and grant programs, trying to understand how someone like me could create something lasting and valuable with the money that represented 4 decades of Edmund's and my shared work. The answer came to me during a conversation with Garrett, who had used his severance package and additional compensation to rent a small workshop space where he was building custom furniture for individual clients. "Eleanor," Garrett said during one of our monthly coffee meetings at Mel's Diner, "what you and Edmund created wasn't just a business. It was a training ground. Half the skilled furniture makers in this county learned their trade working for Harrison & Sons. We didn't just build furniture, we built careers, we built expertise, we built the next generation of craftspeople." That conversation made me understand that the real legacy of Harrison & Sons wasn't the corporate entity that Wesley had tried to steal. It was the knowledge, skills, and work ethic that Edmund and I had passed on to hundreds of employees over 4 decades. And that legacy couldn't be stolen or liquidated or destroyed by family betrayal because it lived in the hands and minds of people who had learned their trades in our workshop. I established the Garage Fund, named in honor of the converted garage where Edmund and I had started Harrison & Sons, with 3 employees and more determination than capital. The foundation provides grants ranging from $5,000 to $25,000 to skilled tradespeople who want to start their own small businesses, but lack the startup capital to rent workshop space, purchase tools, or cover initial operating expenses. Grant recipients don't just receive money, they receive mentorship, business planning assistance, and ongoing support from a network of established craftspeople who understand the challenges of building a trade business from scratch. We help furniture makers, woodworkers, metalworkers, glassblowers, potters, and other artisans transition from working for someone else to building something of their own. In the 2 years since establishing the Garage Fund, we've provided startup grants to 37 small businesses, the same number of employees who lost their jobs when I dissolved Harrison & Sons. 12 of our grant recipients are former Harrison & Sons employees, who are now building successful independent businesses. The others are craftspeople from across the region who needed just enough capital and support to transform their skills into sustainable enterprises. What I discovered in funding these new businesses was something Wesley and Iris had never understood. Real wealth isn't measured in bank account balances or asset valuations. Real wealth is measured in the number of people whose lives are improved by your choices, the number of families who achieve financial stability because of opportunities you helped create, the number of traditions and skills that survive into the next generation because you chose to nurture them rather than exploit them. Several of our grant recipients have begun working together on larger projects, creating an informal network of independent craftspeople who refer clients to each other and collaborate on complex custom work. What Wesley tried to destroy by liquidating Harrison & Sons has actually been reborn as something stronger and more resilient, a community of skilled artisans who own their own businesses and control their own destinies. 3 years later, as I sit in my comfortable apartment overlooking the downtown area, where the Garage Fund has helped establish a thriving arts district, I can honestly say that being betrayed by my son was one of the most transformative experiences of my life. Not because betrayal is good, but because surviving it taught me that I was stronger, smarter, and more resourceful than I had ever imagined. Wesley and Iris taught me that some people will always see others as resources to be exploited rather than relationships to be cherished. But the Garage Fund has taught me that there are far more people in the world who want to build something meaningful than there are people who want to steal what others have built. The 37 small businesses we've funded represent hundreds of jobs, thousands of satisfied customers, and a renaissance of skilled craftsmanship that will continue long after I'm gone. If you're someone whose family has treated you like an inconvenience rather than a person, someone whose contributions have been dismissed, or whose autonomy has been questioned because of your age or circumstances, I want you to understand something crucial. You have more power than they realize, and you have more options than they want you to consider. The people who try to diminish you often reveal more about their own limitations than about yours. Wesley and Iris saw an elderly woman recovering from a stroke and assumed she was helpless. What they were actually looking at was someone with 4 decades of business experience, legal knowledge, financial resources, and a network of loyal relationships they had never bothered to understand or respect. Your age is not a limitation. It's a collection of experiences, skills, and wisdom that younger people haven't had time to acquire. Your need for assistance in some areas doesn't make you incompetent in all areas. Your willingness to trust family members doesn't make you naive. It makes you decent. And when that trust is betrayed, your response doesn't have to be helpless acceptance. They thought I was a lock to be picked, an obstacle to be removed, an asset to be liquidated. What I actually was, what I had always been, was the owner of my own life, the architect of my own choices, and the guardian of my own legacy. I wasn't just holding the key to Harrison & Sons, I was holding the key to my own destiny. You are never too old to reclaim what is yours. Your dignity, your autonomy, your right to make decisions about your own life, your legacy, these things belong to you, not to people who think your age or circumstances make you vulnerable to exploitation. Sometimes the quietest exit becomes the loudest statement. Sometimes the person everyone underestimates turns out to be the most dangerous opponent they could have chosen. If stories like mine inspire you, stories of people who refused to accept other people's limitations and fought back against betrayal with intelligence, preparation, and strategic thinking, please subscribe to this channel. I share these experiences not for sympathy, but to demonstrate that being underestimated can become your greatest advantage if you're smart enough to use it. Share your own stories in the comments below. I want to hear about times when you surprised people with your strength, when you turned other people's low expectations into your secret weapon, when you discovered that you were more capable than anyone realized. Your voice might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to find their own courage. Remember, your legacy isn't what people try to take from you, it's what you choose to build with what remains. And sometimes what remains is everything you need to create something better than what you lost.